Good afternoon, everyone. I call to order the Student Achievement and District Instructional Performance Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. Welcome, everyone. Ask everyone in the audience to silence their cell phones and electronic devices. Mike, would you please call the roll for us, please?
Thank you. Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Ms. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Here.
Dr. Moffitt? President Lindy?
Here. Thank you very much. We have an exciting and important set of agenda items this afternoon. For folks who are able to look at our agenda, you'll see there listed our 3-month board priorities. And just remind everybody who is watching and my colleagues where these came from. We voted as a board at our January work session on the 5 areas where the board wanted to see us make the most progress over the next 3 months. And you'll see those 5 areas reflected here. My commitment as board president is to focus our work and our time on the areas that the board as a body has prioritized. And so I'm very proud to report that all of these are in progress and moving forward. On one of them, item 4, transportation, we're going to discuss that today. I know for many of my colleagues, this is just a giant priority. That is partly because of the cost that transportation drives for the district, and partly because of the pain point this has been for so many families and staff members over the course of, I think, certainly this year, but also many, many years in recent history. You'll see also on our priorities, number 3 is updating our bylaws. I want to thank the Policy Committee Chair, Mr. Morosky, and the Policy Committee members for the work that they've been doing on this front. I understand they have a discussion coming up on Friday where they'll be talking about this more, but that's also one of our priorities that's moving forward, so thank you very much. On strategic planning, we have been in touch with the ALMA group that has put together a timeline for the engagement over the course of the spring, which folks should receive tomorrow, so that we'll get a chance to talk about it as a group at the board meeting coming up on a Monday. So just sharing, again, where these came from, my commitment to make sure we're spending the majority of our time on the areas that the board as a whole has decided are most important, and that we're moving forward on those. So last point before we go to our first presentation is the big picture. As we move into the next months, this spring and over the summer, I wanted to share my hope that our focus can start to shift to our board adopted goals and guardrails. Everybody has a copy of that in front of you. And people will remember that these are based on the input we received from thousands of community members, and that they are focused, as they should be, on outcomes for children. And so I'm excited as we move into the summer and next fall. I hope to be able to spend more and more of our time talking about how students are doing and the progress the district is or isn't making towards these goals and towards these outcomes. I think there are lots of chances as we evaluate the administration, as we work on the budget, to use these as a lens for doing those things and doing them. So with that, we have 4 very exciting and important presentations tonight. The first of which is going to be on English language learners, and we'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, President Lindy, and we will give Rob just a moment to get the ELL presentation up so we can start there. As we are moving into making sure that, and I'll get the acronym right for the name that we have now, but as we are moving into our focus during the COW meeting of making sure that we're also focusing on student achievement as a part of the re-envisioned meetings, what we have before us after getting the work plan from last week, from our last board meeting, we're beginning to move through our areas of focus as it relates to academics. So if we'll notice, we have 3 presentations today that are specific to work that we're doing academically for our students and how we're looking to move forward with that. So we're starting with our proposal for English language learning support. Next slide. So we started with a needs assessment as we think about our students, and we know that we have a large number of students that are beginning to move into the city in that English is not their first language. So we started by looking at our newcomer students and how we have risen over the last 3 years and increases for this school year and what we anticipate moving into next year. Many of our families that are new to the area are not fluent in English and therefore find the process of enrolling in school and navigating registration and the registration process really overwhelming. And while we also have many resources available through community providers, parents may be overwhelmed as well and would benefit from a single contact who's already familiar with providers throughout the city. Next slide. So I wanted to just utilize this information to give you a visual of how our ELL population has grown over the last 5 years. So if we look at where we were in 2018-19, we had a little over 3,500 students, almost 3,600 students, as compared to right now, 4,600 students. So if we think about in less than 5 years, we've grown by almost 1,000 students, specifically in our ELL population. And right now we're a little less, not a whole lot, but we're a little less than where we were last school year. Next slide. Here, I wanted to also share that as we think about our count of students, what we see on this particular slide is the percent of the total population of the students in the school that are ELL. So we'll notice, for example, we know that Roberts is one of our center programs. The red dash represents the actual count, but the blue bar represents the percentage of the total population. Next slide. Currently, the supports that we offer during the school year for our students, we have a pretty diverse model of how we provide support to students and how we continue to provide support to them. So of course, at first we have what we can consider tier 1 support, and that means universal support in all schools. And so to the fullest extent possible, the goal is to make sure that our ELL students are educated in classrooms and general ed settings with their peers. We have building-based or specialists for ELL that provide small group instruction for students through our English language development process, through pull-out or in the classroom, in addition to collaborating with general educators. Then we go to our targeted English support, and this is for students who are not scoring at the proficient level in reading, writing, or speaking, and listening, who also need a language education plan. And then our most intensive support is what we would call SLIFE, and it's really for our newcomer population, but this is students with limited or interrupted formal education and the programs that are available for them. So many of these students are recent immigrants. They're new to the US and they've experienced significant gaps in their formal education in their home country, or they require intensive English language development and support. Next slide. What we are moving into for the summer, and this is new, more specific and targeted for the summer, is offering support during the summer as well. So this one, I'm sorry, this is still during the school year. So for our ELL building-based teachers at our specialized 712 high schools, we provide core academic instruction and intensive English language development in a sheltered classroom setting, which essentially means that students are in a setting with just other ELL students, which makes it more intensive in terms of support. And then we also have in our K-8 programs where we offer the same type of program in a sheltered setting with intensive supports. Next slide. For summer scholars, what we're moving into for this year is in providing intensive newcomer SLIFE shelter ELL supports. And so this is with our students through orientation, multilingual and native language paraprofessional support for the summer. Our West Side location is Carson, and it serves the whole schools, Carson, Roberts, and Reese Price. And our East Side or Central location is Roseland Condon, and serves the whole schools for Roseland, Ames, and Hartwell. And our other non-shelter programs, inclusive of ELL supports, our ELL itinerant specialists provide English language development support during summertime to all of our host locations. Next slide. So as we're moving into this year, we're also looking at additional supports for our students. We do believe that it's really important for us to touch each one of our students even after school is out. So touching the students in the period of time from the last day of school to the opening of school in August. So bilingual and multilingual outreach personnel who are well acquainted and connected with the immigrant community would work with the community partners to provide support to students. During the summer, we're calling extended time functions, and we would work with our union teams. We've had some conversation with CFT already, because most of these individuals will fall under CFT, but they would work closely with and meet weekly with the Office of Communication as we're focusing on marketing and messaging and branding and making sure that we're getting the word out to our families about the supports that we offer. Also, orientation videos for our students and for our families in the elementary school settings. So we would reach out to and post at home our CPS informational sessions within the local community organizations, apartment complexes, and places of worship. So really making sure that we're intensifying the information that is being provided to our families, to our ELL families. Next slide. Along the same line, working with the Hispanic Chamber and Cincinnati Regional Chamber to identify local businesses willing to share our information with families as well, providing families with community resources and information in the community that really address the whole child. So whether that is medical and dental services that are within our buildings, whether it's other supports that are provided by the support groups that are in the area, making sure that our families know how to access those and they see us as a resource for that. Continuing to partner with our social and local media to promote CPS in multiple languages and through personalized messaging. And also we find that there's a lot of assistance that's needed for our newcomer families with just registering for school, going through the registration process, going through the enrollment process. So making certain that we're providing that support while we're also, next slide please, while we're also giving additional support for educational resources and educational support and how our students are getting the academic help that they need. As we were going through the conversations around budget, you will recall that one of the positions that we were recommending for this year for our schools that had 20% or greater in the school buildings was specific to an ELL community coordinator for the schools. And this is to really make sure that we have someone in the building that has a specific focus on our ELL students in the buildings that have a large percentage of students that are ELL. So really working to improve overall outcomes, improving engagement for parents, building rapport with students, tracking students as necessary, continuing to conduct home visits, supporting teachers and school teams with additional services, making certain that our students, as they're testing, they're getting the resources that they need from testing, from their language tests that they have to take as well. So this is one of the positions that is a new position collectively for us this year as a part of support for our ELL families and schools. Next slide. So our outreach plan for our newcomer families, and for our newcomer families, and you've heard me talk often about newcomers, because not only do we have our regular ELL population, and I've just shared some of the supports that we're providing for them, but our newcomer families, many of them have limited to no English. And the students, many of them also have had limited educational experiences. So we have to think differently about how we really maximize the support that we're providing to them. So new student enrollment packets include a language usage survey. The survey identifies the level of service and language of communication with the family. So it's really what language is spoken within the family and how the students have access to that. The enrollment packet also asks for the length of time students have been in a U.S. school. The ELL team then from there identifies newcomer students and families based on the results of the surveys. Once they're identified, students and families are invited to participate in our school and the orientation process. And then during orientation, ELL staff conduct a need assessment with each of the family. Following the needs assessment, the staff links family to applicable organizations and services to provide in-time support. So really thinking about not just what we're doing academically in school and providing that level of support, but how are we connecting them to the larger community so that they're able to get the additional support in that space as well. Next slide. So our overall expected outcomes, we want to make sure that by reaching out to our students and families through community agencies, through places of worship, and through businesses, that we build relationships and trust in our district and in our schools. By building a strong foundation of trust and support, we will increase family involvement, student enrollment, and attendance, and overall student achievement, because the goal ultimately is to increase student achievement. By coordinating with community partners, we can create a network of service providers to meet students and family needs efficiently and swiftly to improve not just the academic outcomes for our students, but the well-being of students and their families economically, socially, and medically. Next slide. So this is the end of the information to share today about ELL. I did want to make sure that we really know that we're focusing on how we're giving additional support. I don't think it's a secret that we have some organizations that have moved into the community because they are looking to address our ELL population of students. And we want our families have selected us. We are the first choice school district for our families, and we want to make sure that we're providing the services that they need at the level that they need those services. So I'll stop there and see if there are questions for me.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Do board members have questions or comments on the presentation? Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy, and thank you, Superintendent. I just have a comment, and I'm just really grateful to see this presentation in my what I like to call my real job. We have a few policy priorities for the human services sector in Cincinnati, and at our annual meeting in February, we elected to create a New Americans Committee to work on these very issues. We have some members who served 2 years ago, not to get into too great a detail, but say 16 Hispanic women in one of our members' programs, and last year served 900. Then so the need is great, and I'm just really grateful to see that as the largest district in this corner of the state, we're doing this kind of outreach. Some of my colleagues who have been here for a minute remember me being kind of a pain in the butt, shockingly, about extended summer learning opportunities for ELL kids, because a lot of the students that immigrate here come now. And for whatever reason, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that issue because I'm not, but they come now. And they're already behind, whether it's the SLIFE, ELL, et cetera. And so to hear this is just really great. And I just want to say to the superintendent and her team, however, at least I as one board member can support the initiatives, I'm happy to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Other board members with comments or questions? Ms. Bolton.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. The question about the ELL community coordinators, how would you determine which schools? Will it be by the percentage of the student population?
Correct. So it's actually, it's the schools that had at the time of doing the initial projections, and we know how you feel about the projections. But at the time of doing the initial projections, it was schools that had greater than 20% their population of students that were ELL, so that were identified as ELL students. So the schools specifically, I can tell you the names of the schools that have them right now moving into next school year, or they were approved as a part of the budget process moving into next school year. For the elementary schools, AME, AWL, Carson, LEAP, Midway, Mount Airy, Rising Stars at Carthage, Reese Price, and Roberts. And then for our high school schools, Dater and Withrow.
Thank you. And in that process, will that community coordinator, is that going to be part of the, I don't know the right term, the redefinition of that position?
Right. So that was one of the only positions that we presented during the whole budget process, for that being a redefined position with a specific job description for that role. So years ago, several years ago, I understand that was a role that we had in the district, that there was a separate job description for those that were serving in that capacity. So getting feedback from the schools, when we initially started talking about the roles of the school community coordinators, getting feedback from them and knowing the need for support in the ELL schools, that was one of the ones that we did lift as a position for our schools that had greater than 20%.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Are there other comments or questions before we go to our next presentation? Okay, I'll just add before we move on, Superintendent, I really appreciated particularly the numbers on the increase in student population early in the deck. I think I had I was impressed with the rate at which our ELL student count is increasing, particularly when you think about that as a percent of our overall student body. I just found that to be very compelling, and I appreciate all of these efforts.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to our second presentation, which is a pre-K update.
Awesome. So this is another update as we think about the work that we're doing through student achievement. But I wanted to make sure that we lifted this as part of the follow-up and some of the feedback that we've received around early childhood. So one of the things that I've done through this year, and I don't know that board members are aware of this, but we have a curriculum council through CFT for every one of our core content areas. And so we have about 13 or 14, I believe, maybe 15 different curriculum councils. In November, I had a session with all of the curriculum councils right before we did the State of the Schools address, and just to get feedback from them on the State of the Schools information and any other information they wanted to share. And so at the end of that meeting, there were several of them that had individual questions. And so I shared with them, you know, I will gladly meet with you individually. I'll meet with your group after this time. And when I said that, of course, every group wanted to do the same. So from January through about 2 weeks ago, I have finished meeting with all of the curriculum councils. One of the first, I think the third curriculum council for me to meet with was the curriculum council for early childhood. And there were some concerns that they shared. Some of those concerns we've heard come up in our board meetings, but I did want to make sure that I share some information about recommendations moving forward and what we're doing to address the concerns that they have, because their concerns are valid. So if we can go to the next slide. So to start with, this proposal addresses, or the information addresses the concerns for the Early Childhood Curriculum Council for needed additional support. The Curriculum Council concerns specifically were more time needed to complete requirements for ODE licensing and step up to quality. So required professional development and compliance, 30 hours biannually for compliance, and then step up to quality documentation. And that's how we get to our 5-star when we think about our early learning schools that are 5-star schools. And then planning within the classroom while students are napping. So those are 3 areas that that were really areas of concern for the council. Next slide. So our early childhood education department served 2,061 students currently through the school year in 135 separate classrooms. The current capacity for us is 2,200 students. So we have a little more room to go in terms of getting to the 2,200, but we see that there's not a lot of additional capacity in terms of where we are with what we currently serve. Next slide. So our step up to quality or 5-star requirements ask for documentation in essentially 5 areas: learning and development, family and community partnerships, administrative and leadership practices, social emotional learning, and staff qualifications and professional development. Okay, so when we start thinking about our total number of hours to meet the requirement, there are 56 total hours to meet the requirement for step up to quality. So additional time for training and step up to quality requirements. Moving into where we're looking to go for this year, 2 non-student instructional days in August, 1 non-student instructional day in November, and 1 non-student instructional day in April. So just to give a little bit of background here, this past year, we had 2 non-instructional days for staff. And so essentially non-student instructional days for staff. So essentially that meant that outside of our regular professional development days, there were 2 days that staff were able to work on their tasks that were necessary for certification, for step up to quality requirements, for home visits, and those kinds of things. So this year, in meeting with the team, the concern really has been that was not enough time. And so the recommendation in years past, and it's been several years ago, apparently, there was at some point a day a month, I believe it was, that the staff did not have students. So it was a non-student instructional day. As was shared with me, it was the will of the board at that time that we increased instruction for students. And so in increasing the instructional time for students, it meant that there was not the additional time for the non-student instructional day. And the other thing that we also know is when there are days that students are not in school, then it also is a hardship for families. So trying to make sure that we're addressing the needs of our staff, but we're also addressing the needs of our families that we're serving. So we have three district-wide release days for licensure requirements and step up to quality documentation. And this is for certificated and civil service. So our teachers and our paraprofessionals all have to go through licensing in order for us to have the necessary step up to quality documentation. Summer learning opportunities, this is a new one, so that this year, as we are offering professional development throughout the summer, we give opportunity voluntarily for teams or for members to come in and to do the professional development, whether that's in person or whether it's virtual, but it then gives them an opportunity. If they choose to do that during the summer, then it's not something that they would then be looking to do during the school year. And then making sure that all of our professional development will be OCCRRA approved, so that as we are doing that professional development time during the school year, it's already approved and then it becomes a part of the required hours, not the professional development and then hours on top of that. And continuing to collaborate with DSS and program implementation to ensure all professional development is OCCRRA approved. This includes our autism training, our Montessori trainings to meet the needs of staff and students. Our early childhood staff to continue to prepare and organize for documentation for the forms and information that they need. So clarification of nap time supervision. From the administrative code, the ratio may be doubled for nap time and shall only be doubled if all children in the group are on cots or mats and if there are enough staff members in the building to meet the ratio. Teachers are able to leave the classroom if student service assistants are able to call for support and all students are on cots. And so I do see that the presentation that was uploaded is not accurate. It's not the accurate one that should have been uploaded because assistance was corrected in the accurate one, but we'll continue. Assistance TS, not CE. So I do want to address that. Let's go to the next. So where that is, if we'll go back one slide, please, Rob. Want to make sure that there's clarification here because in some of the feedback that we hear, one of the concerns from the early childhood teachers is they don't have any planning time because they always have their students. So some schools, depending on the number of staff that you actually have, they are able to create the time for teachers. In other schools, they're not able to do so. So we may have, while paraprofessionals are something that are a part of the setup, we know that we've had a shortage of paras, and therefore it's caused some challenges with some teachers being able to get the additional planning time that they otherwise would have. So we do want to make sure that this year we're continuing to work with schools. We're working with our early childhood education office to provide coverage in classrooms so that teachers are able to get their planning time as well. They've done a really good job of doing the oversight for the students, but we know the importance of teachers having planning time. Next slide. So this just gives us a breakdown of what we would be looking at with the days that we just referenced as non-instructional days, non-student instructional days. So for this year, school starts on August the 17th for all of our students. This year, we're looking for our early childhood classrooms to start on Monday, on the Monday of the following week instead of starting on the 17th. So Friday is the 18th, 19th, 20th. So starting on August the 21st instead of starting on Thursday, the 17th. We do believe that this will give teachers some of the lead time that they need to make sure that they have met with the families, that they have done the surveys that they have to do with the families, and that they're able to start with their training that's required for them as well. And so in meeting with in having some conversation with CFT, and this week we will continue the conversation with the curriculum council, but while for many of them it will not be enough, it does give more than we had last year in trying to be responsive to the concern. Next slide. And so this breaks down really where we're looking at each of those days, how we would then take the hours that are required and make sure that we are addressing the needs in terms of compliance. We also, and I say it that way because our approved professional development that they have, not only does it have to be approved professional development, but it also has to be by an approved OCCRRA entity that's actually doing the professional development as well. So we want to make sure that as we're going through each of those times, we've mapped it out for teachers up front so they know that these are the things that they will be doing during that time, and therefore they can prepare appropriately. Next slide. Moving forward, our courses offered will be OCCRRA approved to provide trainings within the workday. Professional development will directly relate to regulations, requirements, and instructional needs of staff, students, and families. And then professional development will be embedded into the district calendar. So that means our current professional development time being really intentional about what those requirements are, and then building those requirements into the professional development time that we have. And so I'll stop here for questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. What questions or comments do board members have on the pre-K presentation? Going once, going twice. Mr. Craig.
Just two questions, and I think one of them might kind of answer itself, but I know as we're thinking about from our budget standpoint of going into next year, the role of the paraprofessionals and the number of paraprofessionals that we would have and that kind of deal. And I think you mentioned in the presentation, part of the reason some of the teachers were not able to do their professional development time this year or raise it as a concern is the ability to have a para to be providing some assistance while the children are during their nap time and that type of thing for the teacher to actually utilize that time. Is that something that, in thinking about that, is that something also we're thinking about it with regards to what the staffing levels need to be within those individual programs in schools?
Right. So just for clarity, the challenge has not been the professional development time for the paras. There is the time that's built in, but there was not necessarily the strategy that supported that to make sure that the professional development days were days that would also meet the step up to quality expectations. So you have the professional development days that we have during the school year, but then on top of that, the teachers have, and it's biannually, but on top of that, they had 56 hours of needed professional development. So one of the things that's different for this year is making sure that there is intentionality in getting the professional development scheduled so that when they're doing that, it's able to come off of the total number of hours they need. Where the challenge is for paraprofessionals, and it's really not a challenge of having the finances. Through our early childhood program, we could hire additional paraprofessionals. The challenge is actually having the individuals to hire.
Yeah, and then I think my second question is, I know we're in the enrollment numbers, we're hitting pretty close to that capacity number. What are our strategies with regards to addressing that potential if we were to see a large influx of folks desiring to be in our early childhood programming?
I think that'd be a great problem for us to have. I know that our treasurer is not here right now, but as we talk about, our CCP, Cincinnati Preschool Promise, and the funding that our taxpayers have provided for us to help make sure that we're providing services to our students, we recognize that there is more that would have to be provided in order for us to move beyond the current capacity. I think the other thing that's important is that as we think about areas where there is the need, as some of the conversations that we've had earlier, locations for where there is a need, and then how we are really being strategic about using those locations.
Thank you very much, Vice President Craig. Ms. Bolton.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. We do need to increase our capacity, both, I think, on the east side and the west side, and it actually impacts some of the other buildings. I'll speak for the neighborhood in College Hill particularly. There are 4 classrooms currently at Aiken High School that are populated by preschool kids. And as we know, many of our high schools are at the brim of capacity. So it has sort of a domino effect as well. So it can impact some of our other areas. So I think we do need to expand our quality seats. And as you said, go where it is needed in particular. The other thing, again, I just going back as to the issue of the instructional time. That was, as you mentioned, twofold. One, it was the fact that our families really are burdened by the fact when we do not have school, especially for the youngest of our students. So that was a concern of the board that was insisting upon that. But also, we were not necessarily seeing the kinds of instructional results that we wanted to begin to see, or that we kind of touted would occur as the kids moved to kindergarten. So that was confused a little bit because of changing in the tests or whatever for crawl and what have you. But those were the 2 issues, wanting to see the kind of increase in instructional results, but also, as you mentioned very well, the burden for our families when we don't have our school for our littlest students.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any other comments on pre-K before we go to Montessori curriculum? Superintendent, any last things you want to add on early childhood?
I just want to kind of punctuate that while this is an opportunity for us to move closer to where the teachers really, where they're getting the support that they need in terms of early childhood, for some it's not going to be enough. And so I just want us to be prepared for that. We have, doubled the time in terms of the non-student instructional time by adding those 2 days. I think the other part of that is there are going to be some families that may not be excited about the fact that their 3rd graders start school on Thursday, but their pre-K student doesn't start school until Monday. We do know that in the district previously, we have had staggered start times, staggered beginning of school start times for our pre-K families. And so that is something that, has been a consideration, and so it may not cause as much of a concern, but did want to make sure that we were aware of that and that we had the information necessary to talk about why we're doing that. Our pre-K teachers are also doing home visits. They're meeting with families to make sure that they're doing a plan to address the needs of the students. And so giving them just a little bit of extra time to do that is definitely a plus for them to have that. That's all that I have on that, President Lindy.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Were there any other comments board members wanted to share? If we're good, then let's go on to Montessori curriculum adoption. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is also a carryover from work that started about 2 years ago for the Montessori adoption. So this is giving us an update for where we are now, because we are looking forward to moving forward. Next slide. So overall, the purpose, and I think we're clear on the purpose, the Montessori work team and central office staff seek official adoption of the Montessori curriculum developed by CPS Montessori work teams. So we've offered an elementary Montessori program for over 47 years and a Montessori high school program for more than 29 years. We know that 1 out of 6 students in Cincinnati public schools attend a Montessori program school. The new Montessori curriculum creates alignment between Montessori practices and materials and state and district standards and expectations. It ensures students attending Montessori schools will benefit from rigorous instruction, resulting in increased student achievement. Next slide. We want to thank the individuals that are on this slide for being a part of the work team. It was comprised of practitioners from CPS Montessori schools who participated in collaborative work during district professional development days, teacher feedback forums, and teacher-led sessions at their school site. So thank you to each of the practitioners that gave up their time to make certain that we are able to move forward with our elementary Montessori curriculum that is supportive of our current district curriculum as well. Next slide. So just to give us a little information, in 2021, the work teams made up of teachers and administrators formed to create a curriculum which would be codified by the CPS board for Montessori students from pre-K through graduation. Fall of this past fall, a preliminary scope and sequence was created, and teachers in each age band identified missing elements based on the scope and sequence for the curriculum that was being used. In the winter, this past winter, work teams, and actually it was between December and January, work teams analyzed and revised assessments to align to the depth and rigor of the state standards. And so where we are currently, the work team and the district team has finalized the scope and sequence and seek adoption by the superintendent and the CPS board. The fall of 2023, which would be this coming fall, we will look forward to launching the Montessori curriculum, launching a Montessori curriculum council. We currently don't have a curriculum council for Montessori for the year, and then have a plan of action for uncredentialed faculty to become Montessori certified. And then by the fall of 24, we would like to begin the process of making sure that all of our elementary schools are AMS accredited. Just a little bit of information on the actual curriculum and the way that it's set up. So it takes us from the philosophy statement to the pacing guides that go along with the subjects, to the individual content and content areas, the monthly assessments and rubrics, and then the observation forms that go along with that. And this talks to us a bit more about just the fields of study, how we're thinking about the checklists that are being used, the connectivity to the overall standards, the evidence of the creative problem solving that happens within the lessons as well, and for the students, and what are the overall guiding questions, or what are those themes that are important that would come out of each of the lessons of study. Next slide. So additional consideration, the recommended adoption provides crosswalks to connect the Montessori methods with state standards, district approved curriculum, and DOK, or depths of knowledge, questioning levels, offering higher order thinking and deeper learning for all age bands to ensure seamless instruction regardless of Montessori credentialing of the current faculty for positive school outcomes. The other thing is that the adoption creates shared definitions for content, rigor, and differentiated resources, providing high quality instruction on content for students, teachers, leaders, and community members. And lastly, the recommended adoption provides a vision for instruction, student experience, and outcomes, offering continuous evaluation of the curriculum and supplemental resources, usage, and engagement to identify gaps and opportunities that are evidence-based. Next slide. So the financial implications as we think about moving into this year, all credentialed faculty enrolled in a Montessori certification pathway for resources and supports needed. This would allow programs, the programs are offered at Xavier and also MACTE accredited institutions. The instructional impact teacher credentialing supports fidelity to the program and ensures student outcomes intended by the official Montessori curriculum. And as we think about, this would be something that we would see as a part of the proposed budget for the district level, because our Montessori work is funded at the district level. But the tuition and program fees for 20 uncredentialed teachers, the annual cost for the program tuition and fees is about $10,000 per participant. And then moving forward for next school year, not the 23-24 school year, but the 24-25 school year and beyond, beginning to work with having our elementary schools accredited like our high schools are. So starting with our elementary sites, to have them accredited by May of 2027, which would be the end of the 26-27 27 school year. Began the process of accreditation, which includes the application review and candidacy, the self-study, so forth and so on. What would be necessary for professional development, development and retention of credential educators. So one thing that's important is that we are getting our teachers credentialed, but that we also have expectations around retaining the teachers that we're also having credentialed. And then the $15,000 to start the accreditation process. The yearly membership, once the schools are accredited, is a $10,000 yearly membership. Next slide. That's where I'll stop on our Montessori adoption. Any questions that we have there?
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Do board members have questions or comments on the Montessori adoption curriculum? Dr. Moffitt.
I have just a couple questions, and I've been trying to hold them all so we can get through our presentations. But with regarding the Montessori curriculum adoption, and speaking to some of my Montessori friends, because I happen to be a fan of Montessori, so in speaking to them, there is a Montessori diploma that could be provided to students that graduate from Montessori. Would this AMS accreditation allot for that? Is that what you're kind of proposing in that our students would be able to graduate with a Montessori curriculum or a Montessori diploma?
So I would actually have to get back to you on the response to that particular question because our high schools are already accredited. And so what I would have to have the team respond to me, and if one of my team members is in the group and you want to send me the answer for that, I can respond to it. I am very familiar with the IB diploma. I'm not as familiar with a specific Montessori diploma. The AMS certification right now is for the elementary schools. And so if it's a requirement in order for the students to get a Montessori diploma, that they have that they're going through it to an accredited school at each level, maybe that would be the response. But let me get the specific answer and respond back to you with that.
Okay, thank you. And then there was also discussion and information that was shared with me that there's a couple of districts, not anything local, where they have a Montessori advisory council that would include like Xavier University that has a Montessori program, but other staff and community members that are kind of working for the Montessori schools, and we do have quite a few. So has there been any discussion about that forming that particular council that was shared with me was on the board level? It was an appointment from the board, but has there been any discussion to kind of have a advisory group for our Montessori our specific needs for our Montessori students?
So there is currently and has been in partnership with Xavier as well, a pretty active Montessori group that works now. What it is not is one that is listed as a board particular group. And so if that's something that, the board chooses to make a separate council for that, I think that's one that there's definitely, there are already individuals that are working in Montessori support and support overall to our schools specifically. And they've been doing that for a period of time. So I don't want to imply that that's new, because it's not. They've been doing this for a while. Xavier was also very instrumental in assisting with the curriculum and doing the alignment for the curriculum, making sure that there was connectivity between our district approved curriculum and then making sure that it was infused with the Montessori tenets.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Do we have other board member comments or questions on Montessori? Ms. Bolton.
Just an enrollment and financial piece. I think we're kind of coming to grips with the fact of when we look at enrollment, certainly at Clark and at Gamble, that we will need eventually, and I mean eventually soon, a third Montessori high school. And I would hope that that's also maybe not under the curriculum councils or curriculum advisory, but as part of our financial piece regarding growth curricularly and also from a facility standpoint, And then two, if indeed we go toward the east and west and central corridors, we're matched up pretty well east and west with a number of elementary Montessoris, but in the central corridor, I think we probably could actually have one more Montessori. So just as everybody's talking in terms of this, I think we need to kind of add that to some of the discussion that's taking place. And I'm very excited about the certification at the elementary levels. I think that's great. I also know our biggest problem is matching and meeting those state requirements regarding testing and still being true to the Montessori way, if you will. So I'm interested to see how all the professionals like you figure out how to deal with Columbus at the same time being true to Montessori concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Bolton, as well. To respond to Board Member Moffitt's question, Board Member Moffitt, if you could possibly provide us some information from the person maybe that you're speaking with. None of the team has heard of the Montessori diploma before, only certification for teachers. And so if we can get, I'm wondering if that maybe is something that's being done in a district specifically, so we can do some research around that if we can, just if there's someone that's already shared with you where that's coming from, we can then kind of maybe connect with them and take it from there to see where the information is from. The colleges offer a Montessori diploma for teachers as well, so I'm wondering if that may be a part of it, a Montessori degree for teachers. And then the council specifically, the work that's happening with that, the goal was to move into next year and make it more solidified. So again, if the board would like to make that a separate council, and so that it's in board policy, I just wanted to kind of share that update with you. And thank you, Board Member Bolton, as well, for the feedback in terms of looking at the individual schools. We have had feedback from, of course, both Gamble and Clark around some of the same things that you're referring to. And we have worked this year with our principals, and many of them in our Montessori schools. We're working with them, and they're finding a way to help marry the need and the importance of looking at academic data for students while also remaining true to the tenets of Montessori, because we do know that a lot of Montessorians, when it comes to really the testing process, that's something that is of a concern. But I do believe that our principals have been able to work this year and really see where it's beneficial to students, and their teachers are responding to that very well.
Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy, and thank you, Superintendent Wright. My colleagues took both my comments, so I just want to second the third Montessori school in honor of Miss Bates, who used to bring that up every couple meetings, whether or not we were talking about Montessori or not. We are going to need it. I think we all know that. But then also, I kind of want to pick up where Dr. Moffitt left off a little bit. I've had similar conversations in the community. I am by no means a Montessori expert. I'm probably maybe the least one on this board, but I have a lot of friends who are experts and have heard this idea of this advisory committee, but more significantly, and I'll shoot this to the superintendent as well and to the board members if they want to see it, or I'll just shoot it to Phyllis that gets everybody. In Milwaukee, the advisory council drafted a 52-page strategic plan for Montessori in response to the unique needs. Again, as I understand it, not speaking as a practitioner, I didn't go to Montessori schools, none of that. I might have done better in school had I don't know. But in response to COVID, which upended a lot of the way I understand it, again, the pedagogy of Montessori, the philosophy, et cetera. So it's a 52-page document that Milwaukee came up with. The parts of it I understand, I think, are really good. So again, I'll send it to Phyllis just to pass along, but I do think it's an interesting concept, so I wanted to kind of second Ms. Bolton and then Dr. Moffitt on that piece about the advisory council.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morosky. Last call, questions on Montessori curriculum adoption. All right, we're moving into our last presentation this evening, which is about one of the priorities we set as a group back in January, which is transportation.
Thank you, President Lindy. So I want to start this conversation by thanking the board collectively for just being thought partners with me around where we go next with this information. I do know that this is, it has the potential to be challenging for some, but it also has the greatest potential and opportunity to right-size challenges that we've had in transportation for a very long time. So this is one of those areas where, just to start with, I just want to kind of put out there that there is not a way for us to, one, fix our problem with transportation next year and keep everything the same. The second is, there is not a way for us to fix our problem with transportation and not have some changes that are going to impact individuals. So as we've worked through the recommendations and the scenarios, we've done that with recommendations that would provide the least amount of, or our ultimate recommendation is one that would provide the least amount of disruption, as close to the least amount of disruption as possible. So just want to kind of frame the conversation by starting there as I get ready for the questions that come out of the presentation. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so as we get started, we know that our goal is to improve efficiency, safety, on-time status, and the level of service. We must pursue a strategy that reduces the number of routes needed, and this in turn reduces the number of buses and drivers needed. Next slide. So currently, this presentation is only focused on our K-8 yellow buses. And I say K-8 yellow buses because we know that we have some 7th and 8th grade students that currently ride Metro. For the purpose of our presentation, they are included in the numbers that we have because we don't know that those families would choose to go back to Metro next school year. So just wanted to share that as we're talking about anything that has to do with the presentations, we're talking about that from all of the students that are assigned to our K-8 transportation. So when we think about routes, I know we talk about buses quite a bit, but we have to also think about the number of routes that we have. And so the number of routes that we have is really important as we think about moving forward. So currently we have 353 routes, 191 on First Student, 46 on Peterman, and 116 on UTS. For drivers, we currently have 317 drivers. So First Student from the 119 has a shortage of 20 drivers. For UTS, there is a shortage of 16 drivers, and Peterman has 46 routes and 46 drivers. And so total, we have 36 fewer drivers than we have routes currently. We're looking to reduce the routes in line with the number of drivers for the 23-24 school year. So I want to start this part of the conversation by sharing, if we recall when we had our presentation by Formative at our board meeting where we discussed transportation. One of their Formative gave us several different variables, if you will, that would help us to improve our on-time ability and the ability to get our students safely to school, while also looking at the number of routes that we were using to do that. Next slide. So, and Rob, the top of my, let's see here. Okay, so we can pursue the route reduction through 3 primary strategies. The first strategy was the first strategy, and the strategy that had the greatest impact to start with, was reducing and balancing the number of start times in the district. And that's where we started the conversation from last week. The second recommendation is changing or look at changing the walk zone eligibility. And the third conversation is consolidating bus stops. We've not reflected these changes in the analysis yet. So as we talk today, we're only talking about the first strategy of changing start times and the potential of doing some changing to walk zone eligibility. Next slide. So first, we want to look at the start times. Next slide. So there are several parameters that we have to use in adjusting start time. So there are some parameters that were non-negotiables based on all of the information that we've been provided. The first, we know that it's board policy for our healthy start times. So maintaining healthy start times for high schools, which means that high schools start no earlier than 8 o'clock with the goal ultimately of 8:30. Align K-8 and K-12 schools to high school start times. This is because our K-8 and our K-12 schools participate in athletics with our high schools. So in order for them to be able to do that, there must be alignment around when they are actually in school and out of school. And ensure spread with high school start times that doesn't exceed 50 minutes. That's what we have now. That still allows our schools to be able to compete with one another, allows us to do scheduling for athletics, and so not having a greater difference in the start times of more than 50 minutes. A part of what we did is in getting started with the conversation, and you will likely recall from the presentation that I was able to share earlier, we did do a survey with for all of the high school principals, and we had for all of the principals, I'm sorry, and we did have them to identify or select their first, second, third choice for start times. I did want to call out, we know that it's policy, but I did want to call out that 7 of our high schools requested a start time of 7:45. So even though the proposals or the recommendations that we've provided have been based on the healthy start times, I did think it was important to note that there are at least 7 schools that did request as their first choice 7:45. And then we consider the nice to have parameters as we think about how we are creating the puzzle to ensure that we're getting all of our students from our neighborhoods to all of our schools. Keep schools as close as possible to their current start time. That was one of the top priorities. Maximize the number of schools that have to move time. So move schools with more routes first, so that you're really looking to have as least disruption as possible. And then account for any programmatic or school type needs when possible. So those were the other set of parameters that we looked at in really getting to the scenarios that we'll talk about in just a moment. Next slide. So there are 3 scenarios for 2-tier start times. We talked earlier about having 2 specific start times. And in thinking about that, we are really looking at the modification of that so that we're looking at whether it's a pure 2-tier, that means that there are only 2 start times across the district, whether it's a paired 2-tier where we have 2 start times, but they're paired with another school so that you have an early start paired with a later start that has a 70-minute spread in between, and then a modified 2-tier, which means that you have an early start paired with a later start, and then a separate group of schools that would utilize individual buses to then get them to their destination. So these are the 3 ways that we have looked at, and we'll talk about the scenarios. Next slide. So the distribution of schools in each scenario, as we looked across how we would do the pairing and how we could get through with the individual pairings, for a pure start time, for a pure 2-tier start time, for our CPS elementary schools, there would be 12 that could start at 8, 17 of the high schools at 8, and then everyone else at 9:10. So that's the first, if there was only just an 8 o'clock start and a 9:10 start. And I just want to make sure that we socialize with everyone based on all of the feedback that we've gotten from our transportation team and from formative, is that we do need that 70-minute period in between to make sure that we account for the length of location that our students come from to get to their schools. The second scenario is a paired 2-tier, which essentially means that a 7:40 start time would be paired with an 8:50 start time. So 7:40 buses would be paired with then 8:50 buses, and 8 o'clock start time would be paired with a 9:10 start. So for a paired two-tier, we would have 23 schools that start at 7:40. For 8 o'clock, 12 elementary schools and 9 high schools. For 9 o'clock, for 8:50, 9 elementary schools and 8 high schools, and then 9:10 would be 10 elementary schools. And then the last is a modified two-tier, which would give us 32 schools starting at 7:40, 8 elementary schools starting at 8, 3 high schools starting at 8, and then 14 elementary schools starting at 8:50, and 14 high schools starting at 8:50 as well. The other thing that I want us to consider before we go to looking at the distribution of the scenario is we as we are working on organizing the plan for how the buses move, we have to do that by the number of routes, not necessarily by the school level. So the number of schools that we need to move around depends on the number of routes that those schools have and how we're then able to move to be the least disruptive. So, if a school has 17 routes, we may be able to move one school with 17 routes versus moving 5 schools that have 2 routes, 3 routes, 4 routes, so forth and so on until we get to 17. Next slide, please. So this gives us a breakdown overall of the scenarios. And we started with this one because this scenario, the breakdown for each of the scenario allows you to see not only the number of schools that are impacted, but by the amount of time. And so the way that we broke down this information is in the first column after the number of buses, because our optimum number of buses is 321 or less in order for the number of students that we have, the number of schools that we have, and maximizing our routes. So it's looking at no more than 321 routes. As we look at that, we really looked across a continuum of the number of minutes. So the first column represents less than or equal to a 15-minute change, plus or minus. The next column is 15 to 30-minute change. So that means you start 15 minutes earlier, or you start 15 minutes earlier, or start somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes earlier than what you're doing now, or later than what you're doing now. And then the third is greater than 30 minutes. And that's the one that has the greatest impact when we think about schools. So before we actually look at the list of schools going across the rows, we did break this down based on the scenarios. So for example, if you look at the first, scenario A, an 8 o'clock start and a 9:10 start across the district, we have the greatest population with change. 63 of our schools would have to change. And of those 63, 45 of them would be more than a 30-minute change. So that's the best way for us to read that information as we think about how we're looking at the scenarios. The other thing that you see here is our non-publics and our charters listed. While we realize that we do not have the authorization to say when our non-publics and our charters actually can start school, it is important that we recognize that we're providing transportation. And so in order for us to get the students to school on time, we really want to work with our non-public and charter schools so that they are working in partnership with us, so that we are able to address the needs of all of our students, not just the individual schools. And there is also the option, if we're not able to transport, we are able to say that, and then there's the option for pay in lieu of transportation as well. So there are some options for us, but we do believe in beginning to socialize this information with our non-publics and charter schools, recognizing that we're really looking to address the needs of all of our students, that we can get several of them that are willing to partner with us and agree to make the changes as we're asking for those changes to be made. When we look at scenario B, and this is where we have a 2-tiered start, if we just go over to the column that shows the changes, this is the column, this is the row where we have the least amount of disruption. And so there would be 6 of our schools that would have a greater than 30-minute change as compared to 45 schools in scenario A and 7 non-public or charter schools as we think about the changes. So collectively, 56 schools that would have a change, but when we look at the type of change, only 6 of them would have greater than a 30-minute change. And then scenario C, 7:40 start as the early time, 8:50 paired with the 7:40 start, and then a singleton in the middle of 8 o'clock. 12 schools that would have more than a 30-minute change for our district schools, and 2 of our non-pubs. And overall, 70 of our district schools would have a change at all, and 29 of our non-pubs. So now let's look at where the schools break down. Let's go to the next slide. So just to give you more of a visual of what it looks like, we only pulled out here schools with 15 minutes or greater in terms of change, and schools with less 15 minutes the changes are showing. So for the first one, as we look at our schools, 15 to 30 minutes of change in the start time. And we see where the number of schools that we have there on scenario A, and that goes to an 8 o'clock start or a 9:10 start. I think 8:50 may be an error here. And then for the schools that would have greater than a 30-minute change with the 8 o'clock starts, you see the 3 boxes of schools for our district that would have greater than a 30-minute change. And then the non-pubs are at the bottom. Let's go to scenario B. For scenario B, same thing, pulling out the information, 15 to 30-minute change in start times for our schools. You see the schools that are listed. We also did an asterisk here because, as I shared earlier, we asked principals to give us feedback on their start times. And so for the 15 to 30 minutes on this one, 2 of those schools requested the start times that are listed there. So even though it would be a change of 15 to 30 minutes, it's a change that they requested. And then for the schools that would be greater than 30 minutes and a change in start time, these are the ones that would be the most disruptive, but the fewest number that will have that level of disruption. So when we look at this chart as well, both Carson and Hughes requested the times that are listed. And so for those 2 schools, and then we have the other 3 schools that we would really have to work with the staff and the schools because they would have the greatest impact in terms of the amount of time. Next slide, please. And then this is the last scenario, and I think seeing it visually this way, it allows you to see where the changes are and why we make the recommendations, why we're making the recommendations that we've made at this time. So you see the 2 charts under 15 to 30 minutes in change of start time, and then greater than 30 minutes change would be the schools that are listed in the boxes there. If we'll go back one slide, just so that we see the difference. So the 15 and 30 minutes for scenario B has only the 1 box with about 6 or 8 schools in it. If we go back to the second slide, and we see that it's almost quadrupled in the second. So just wanted to share that visual. And let's go to the next. So start time recap. First, we want to reduce to about 321 routes, if not fewer than 321 routes. Given our current driver shortage, the best scenario is B, likely, is B because of the numbers. The thing that's also important to call out here, though, is currently we have 317 drivers. So even with the reduction to 321 routes, we would still need 4 additional drivers if we don't do anything else in terms of trying to get closer to where we're looking to go. The other thing that this does not call out, so for us, we really want to make sure that we're able to get back to a space where we have those 10 buses for athletics and extracurriculars. So while we're saying that we only need 4 drivers, for us, we are articulating that we would need 14 drivers because we do want to have the 10 additional buses for extracurriculars. I do want to make sure that I reiterate that that is not included in these numbers right now. So this is only including getting to the students to and from school. It does not include dedicated athletic or extracurricular buses. It does not account for any new non-public or charter schools, and it assumes that all of our non-pub and charters will agree to the moves and times that we have. So that would be our next layer of work once we get support as we have the conversation with the board today. Next slide. So the next one is changing the walk zone eligibility, and want to just do a little more conversation around this, as I did receive some feedback from board members that we talked about as having the individual conversations around transportation. Let's go to the next. So when we think about walk zone eligibility, we do have a survey, the survey that we put out for our families. We have about 1,700, a little over 1,700 responses now. The last time we did the survey, we only had 81 responses. And I think the difference is we really wanted to make sure that individuals went through the presentation so they understood each of the areas. We had all of the areas included then. So we wanted to make sure that they went through the presentation and they were responding to the presentation as they were doing the survey. This time, and it was a recommendation from Dr. Moffitt during one of our board meetings, 81 surveys just wasn't enough. This time, after the board gave support for going to a reduced start time and better aligning our start times, we relaunched the survey to all families, or actually to everyone, because we have people that responded to the survey that don't have any children in Cincinnati public schools, but they did respond. So some may be community members, some may be charter parents, but there were individuals that responded as well. And what we found from there is that there was, at that point, it was really just responding to things like the start times, the walk times away from to and from school, so forth and so on. So on Monday, we will share, after we have conversation tonight, if it is the will of the board, we'll definitely share just the survey results with you so that you're able to see, at least through today, how many have responded and what those responses have been. All of them are in alignment, however, with the conversations that we're having now. So when we think about walk zone eligibility, one of the recommendations from Formative was really to think about that in terms of making recommendations or changes based on grade levels. And so how we would then look at the impact that we could have based on grade levels. So for example, this chart shows that if we, right now, currently, we're at 1 mile, and we know that the state's requirement is 2 miles. Last year, we were at 1.25 miles. So that is students receive transportation if they are 1 mile away from their home. So from their home to their school, if it's a mile, they receive transportation. Last year, that number was 1.25. So when we changed when we made that change last year, it really increased the number of routes that we needed, because it increased the number of students that now needed to be on a bus. And the state's requirement is 2 miles. I think from the feedback that I've received, really from almost each board member, I don't think there's any interest at all in our district of going to 2 miles. But there could be some conversation around grade levels and possibly looking at increasing possibly to 1.25 miles, depending on the grade level. So that is what this information breaks down. And it just shares with us the impact in terms of if we made changes, what that would then provide for us. And so the greatest, of course, the impact would be the best impact for us would be the 1.25 miles, because the number is then inclusive of the students that would be less than or equal to 1 mile. If we can go to the, so that would give us, if we changed collectively, the number at the bottom tells us how many more students or how many fewer students would then need transportation. So for example, if we change to 1.25 miles, then that means that 1,200 students, there would be 1,200 less students that would be eligible for transportation. Next slide. So change in start time to walk zone eligibility, if it was at the 1.25 miles, reduces our routes from 321 routes to 313 routes. So it changes the number of routes by 8, which is getting us then closer to the need for the additional buses that we will need for athletics and extracurricular. So currently, when our start time savings would give us the 32 routes, and then the walk zone route savings could give us up to 8 more, and that's using the 1.25. So that would save us about 40 routes just with making these changes, which gets us to about 313 for the upcoming school year. Let's go to the next. So that's where we will stop, and I will open up for questions. Rob, I might need you to go back to certain slides during this part of the conversation, so if we'll just be ready for that.
Superintendent, thank you very much for the presentation, and we'll do questions and comments in just 1 second. Can I ask you before we start, what is most helpful to get from the board through the process of this discussion this evening?
Right, so I think the most helpful at this point is support for the changes or recommendations. I think that our recommendation, our entire goal is to make sure that we have enough buses and enough drivers enough drivers, I should say, to address our transportation issue. And that's getting us to 321. And so I think that what I'm looking for from the board is board support on us moving forward, because then the work has to start with engagement. One of the things that we've done after talking to board members individually, we then shared this information with our union groups to get feedback from them. After doing that, we've had conversation, and one of the recommendations that came is in some of the instances where it's 30 minutes or greater, or the greatest number of change, working in partnership with the union groups to do an MOU that would allow some of those individuals that have extenuating circumstances to go to a school that has a different start time. They have an issue with childcare. They're not able, to get to a job that they have in the afternoon. And so we would continue to work in partnership with that. But what we know is we would, this is really the time that we would need to start engaging with families to let them know that this is the change. This presentation has been shared with principals, but only for the purpose of them not seeing it for the first time during this conversation. But that's what I would be looking for from the board.
That's very helpful. So you're looking for the extent to which there's support for the recommendation. And I saw the recommendation includes this option B around aligning start times. Could you just clarify, is there also a recommendation that we go from 1.25 to 1?
So the main recommendation for us right now is the recommendation of the change in the start time, scenario B. However, we do want to have discussion about the additional change in the distance. Because we feel that would then get us closer to really making sure, like if we made that change right now, we know that we have enough drivers to address the concern. So it would put us in a positive instead of a negative.
That's great. So there's a recommendation to do scenario B, and then there's just a request for feedback on the idea of increasing the length of the walking routes.
That is correct.
Great. Board members, questions, reactions? Mrs. Weinberg.
Thank you. Thanks, Superintendent Wright, for the information and also providing the slides too at the end with the start time and the proposed new time of when school would start and when school would end. I did have a question regarding when you got your data regarding the buses and the routes. Were you able to verify students who were eligible for buses but did not utilize them? So when you got your numbers, were you able to really realize and say, okay, this particular student, yes, they're eligible for the bus, but their parent has stated that they're not going to use the bus anymore. And so when we determine routes, do we know that these routes are really routes that they're picking up the kids at?
Yeah,
or
so
are they jumping into the number?
Great, thank you for the question. So this information would be specific to everything that we have up until this time about the student. So we have spent really most of the school year removing dead routes. And so the example of what you're giving would be a dead route, which means that we have a student that is assigned a route, but the parent has elected not to have the child ride the bus. And so that route for us is a dead route. So throughout the school year, we have been updating the entire time so that what we are sharing right now is based on the best information that we have for the students that are actually utilizing transportation, whether it's our transportation or whether they are 7th and 8th graders that are on Metro. We've also included them in these numbers as well.
Thank you. And then I had one other question regarding, I know with switching of the times, I see here that Taft, Gamble High School, Riverview, Schroeder, Spencer, and Woodward would all have, with your proposal of option B, that they would be getting out of school at 3:50. I know one of the concerns, and I know you can't make everyone happy, but in terms of for extracurricular and sporting events, a lot of the complaints were for the schools that were getting out past the time of 3:50, that they would have to then miss their last bell in order to make their sporting event. I know that there's probably not a way to fix that, because then you would probably have to go to option A, in which all the high schools would then get out at 3 o'clock. What is your thought process on that?
Yeah, so as we thought about athletics, we really tried to make sure that we did not do a greater spread than what we have right now. So that there is already, and this has kind of been in the works for many years, there's already a process. And so we worked to make sure that we were honoring that process. There were several of the high schools, as I shared, 7 of them that wanted to start at 7:45, which we understand that a lot of the high schools want to start earlier, but we have policy around Healthy Start, and there's a lot of research that supports Healthy Start. And so with that, we wanted to get as close to where we were as possible, and that's how we got to those 2 times. So making sure that their spreads were really as close to where they are right now as possible.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Ms. Jones.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent, for the report. I first want to say that I thought this was a very solid presentation, and it is pretty aggressive, which is what we need in terms of how we impact or change the system to make sure that we're meeting the need. And I am in support of scenario the B. My question, or it's not even a question, it's a comment. I do have concern for going to an option where we still have a shortage. And I hear you saying that there are a couple of things we could look at. And one of those things is the change in the distance. And I know the board, and I know my colleagues, we have colleagues who are really firm in believing that we need to leave it. And I know we just recently changed that policy. But I guess for me, what weighs over that is having enough buses, period. And and I don't know, I'm not here to say let's change the distance. I do think we have to think about that. I do. And so I am more than willing to think about that as help us resolve what we do. I think anything that we do when we decide, whatever we decide, there are going to be some folks who are not happy about that, but I want to make sure that we have enough buses starting out. I don't want to start the new school year with a shortage of buses. So I'll leave that there, but I also am concerned about the caveats because it feels like we have no control over that. I believe that, good negotiation, when you talk to the non-public and the charter schools, unfortunately, I don't see them being as giving as even our own community is. I mean, I think that that's going to be a problem because they want what they want. And in some of these scenarios, I see some tremendous gaps, or not gaps, but tremendous time gaps, I guess I could say, where in some instances, the request is to start school 45, 50 minutes later. And they probably won't do that. So I don't know if you have any reflections or thoughts on that. But I guess in closing, I am saying I would support scenario B, but I do think, and I would encourage us to really look at the distance piece as a possibility if that gets us closer to where we want to go or where we want to be. I hope I made sense.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Board Member Jones. Me?
If you wanted to respond, I wanted to create a moment for you to do that for sure.
Yes, so thank you for the feedback. And I think that we agree with you. And that's why, if you notice in this presentation versus the other conversations that we've had, this included getting us closer to having enough drivers. Now, we have had conversation with our contractors, and with some of the work that they're doing, they do believe that, you know, getting the additional drivers would not be a challenge, but we are concerned. When we had the meeting and when Formative did the presentation, they really talked to us about 3 different things. And one of them was the start times, the other was the walk times, and then we had the third that we didn't bring up into the discussion tonight. But each time we are able to, you know, do some reduction. So the more we can be as precise as possible, the more we can get closer to what it is that we need, the better it's going to be. In terms of our charters and non-pubs, some of them we have begun to reach out to. I think that ultimately we would have, and some, we have a couple that have immediately said they're willing to do whatever they need in order to address the concern, because it's been a concern for them all along. It's been a concern for them all year as well. But we do have some that we may have to go to not being able to provide transportation for them, depending on the situation, and going to a pay in lieu of possibly. So we would really just, now we will start the true engagement around what else we may be able to do, who we might be able to work with, because what we know is these would be the numbers of routes that we need for the most part to make sure that we're addressing the concern.
And if I could add one last comment, I forgot to mention this. Again, I appreciate it. It is aggressive, and I think that's what we need. I think we got to do something that's totally different, not just Band-Aid, but we got to clean the whole wound. So I'm happy about that. I am hopeful. I hope that at some time in the near future, while we're talking about buses right now, we also need to talk operations, and what kinds of things internally are we doing to create and support a positive change, and so that we have strong customer service and meeting the needs of people in that way. And that's, yeah, you can comment on that if you want. I'm just asking that at some time in the near future, we can talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. We'll come back if people want to go a second time. Let me just see if other people have not gone yet. Dr. Moffitt.
So thank you, Superintendent Wright. I think you and I have spoken about what I am most interested in already. I think this is a snapshot, and I've shared this with you, so this is kind of redundant to you, but not to everyone else. This is a snapshot, and hopefully my prayer is that we get a whole bunch of drivers, and you know, we don't have this issue, but unfortunately we have to deal with it right now. My concerns, and it looks like B is what makes the most sense to support with the least amount of impact. I agree with my colleague in that we do have to probably be aggressive in order to get a different result. We have to do different things, and so I'm all for that. I will say that my concerns are the impact to staff that are having, after the deadlines to move schools, you know, we're having to do an MOU and we're having to go backwards. That makes me feel a little uncomfortable because of the potential impact to staff members that may want to be at an earlier school and they're having to transition. And I think I shared with you that I think you've done some of that engagement with them. I do think that moving the mileage, while it's not convenient for some families, I think as long as we're within the law, that we probably could get some grace from the community regarding that. But that leads to my next two comments. I think engagement with families and the staff needs to significantly increase, because I think people will give us grace if they know ahead of time and we are authentic and transparent, which we have not always been regarding transportation and timely. And I think that that's, we will get grace with regard to the community and our increase in the mileage because we are within the state mandates. And so I think people will understand, but they won't understand when you tell them that it's going to happen within a few weeks. They will typically understand if you tell them it is going to happen. And that goes back with the surveys and engagement and getting the message out timely. My question is, and I sent this to you in an email, and I'm not exactly sure if it was answered completely, but in the ad hoc, we're talking about corridors, and we agreed to talk about corridors with regard to east, west, and central. Have we looked at transportation and the impact when we look at it from a corridor model? So I guess my question is, do we have any data around looking at transportation start times for schools in the specific corridors and looking at the data that way and the potential impact to students and families from a corridor model? Because this kind of feels like it's all over. When we look at the schools, they're kind of all over. But have we looked at the data from that particular lens?
Thank you. So in terms of the corridors, we've not. What we have tried to do is look at where we are now, what the needs are that we have currently. This is all based on the number of buses that we need, the number of routes that we need now, which for most of the schools is pretty consistent from year to year. So as we move forward, with the corridor model, then we would possibly need to change, some of the pairings, but we do believe that because it allows us to do maximization, it allows us to get closer to where we need to be collectively. In terms of the communication with families, I agree with you. We started this engagement by doing the roundtable individuals to be a part of that. I'm there. We had several individuals to be a part of that. About 1,000 folks at some point had some level of engagement in that. We moved from there, even though we didn't see more than the 81 surveys, we did have the engagement with the community at that point to at least get some level of feedback. We then did the survey with the principals and had principals to give us recommendations in terms of start times. So if you recall, when I did the initial presentation, one of the reasons that I shared that even that night that we had such a long meeting, that it was so important to a consensus is because we need to be able to move to next steps. And so right then we weren't in a position to do recommendations around start times. Now we are. So once we confirm that, it's really as simple as sharing with principals. Our next principals meeting is tomorrow. It is as simple as sharing with them that this is, many of the schools, they know that something is happening or there's a possibility of there being some change because many principals engage them as they were even making their recommendations or share it with them as we asked them to do, that this is a possibility. Many of them have watched our sessions together. So this will just allow us to go to the next level of something that's finite. Right now, it's not finite. So if we know as of tomorrow, yes, this is what we're moving forward with. Yes, unfortunately, we have these 4 or 5 schools that we may have an impact because of the amount of time of the change. If it's greater than 30 minutes, we may have an impact for the amount of time, but I don't know that we could have done it before we got to this stage. So I totally agree. I think that we start the conversation at that point so families are aware, so that they know what the changes are. There may be some families that make the selection that they need to go to a different school because of the start time. I mean, all of those things are things that we take into consideration, and we're just trying to do that in as least of a disruptive way as possible. And that's why we really did recommend a scenario B. I think as we move farther with, and this is one of the responses that I gave in terms of ad hoc, you know, as we move farther into recommendations that are being provided by ad hoc, I think that it's something for us to continue to look at. We know that one of the challenges that we have right now is, even though we're thinking of our schools in the corridors, our students are not attending school in that way. So they're still coming from all over the district. For our high schools, they're coming from all over the district to go all over the district. And so I think the farther we move along of where we're looking to do the streamlining in organization, the better results that we'll be able to get in terms of transportation as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moffitt. Thank you, Superintendent. I know Ms. Weinberg has to leave right at 6 and asked if she could share one last thought.
Yes, originally Superintendent Wright, when I was giving my, necessarily my questions, I forgot to give my comments. And I just wanted to share that I definitely think option B is a good choice. And I would be in favor of increasing the walking distance if that is going to open up more buses and drivers for us to be successful. So I just wanted to add that in. And thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. So we have not yet heard from Mr. Morosky, Ms. Bolton, or Mr. Craig. Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Lindy, and thank you, Superintendent, for all the work you and your team have done to get us to this point. I don't have a whole lot new to say. I mean, the reality is what the reality is, and I feel good about saying I support the scenario. Having with Ms. Bolton been pretty bullish about start times. We are where we are, and we need to get our kids to school. So I really appreciate the work. I think this is as least disruptive as it probably can be. And yes, some folks who are not necessarily in our complement of schools might be upset, but that's how it's going to have to be. As far as the walk time, I know you wanted some feedback on that. Obviously, it was the committee that I chair. It was last year, I believe, when we revamped all the transportation policies with Ms. Bolton's help and direction and leadership, and we took it down to 1 mile. I kind of share a similar mind as Dr. Moffitt. I think that, you know, as long as we're in the law, and not only are we within the law, but we're still better than most. It's what we have to do. It's what we have to do if we can. The most important part is getting our kids to school. So I guess in summary, again, nothing new or earth-shattering to say, but I support the recommendation, and am open in policy committee to talk with the current makeup of that committee about the proposal for walk distance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Other folks who've not shared yet, Ms. Bolton?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's comments. I think B makes as much sense, but I have a question. Do we no longer have a shortage of buses, yellow buses?
Yeah, so we actually have the buses, we just don't have the drivers.
So this is very, very important difference. This is a different problem than we've had for the last 2, maybe 3 years. We don't have a shortage of yellow buses. Climate problem because we have not enough drivers. And that's what's guiding me as to thinking we can probably solve this problem. So I just want us to know we're in a different place, and partly because of your leadership and effort and our vendors and God knows our patience of our families. So that's important to me. Also, I do want to say that we mentioned the athletic piece, which is so important, and part of that, the additional buses that are needed, the drain on the to and from school because of the athletics, I think that's important to keep in mind as well, the dedicated bus fleet that is about the yellow buses for athletics. But I don't want us to forget about the during the day needs for field trips, and most particularly health checks and vision tests and dental work. I was told by the person that runs this from the city, just in a telephone conversation that she called and wanted to know because she's getting ready to retire. They're doing 7 kids a day for dental. And in the years past, many, many more. One of the wastes of all is having the infrastructure and having made the investment by our partners and the district about our school-based health centers and vision centers and dental centers, and then not to be able to get the children there is the waste of all. That we need to address. So obviously I want to keep that, but it doesn't have any impact on the yellow bus stuff, which you're sharing with us now, but I don't want to miss an opportunity, as everybody knows, to mention the need during the day for those vans. And we do have a problem, not about buses, yellow buses. I have a question real quickly. I'm concerned as to why the yellow bus piece impacts on the high school. Is it because in our policy work, and it really is through the emphasis, I think, of Mr. Messer particularly, the previous member, that we were giving the 7th and 8th grade families the option to use yellow bus, and we were providing it. If that option goes away and instead it's an option of in lieu of pay or using Metro, does that help us reach the bus issue, the driver issue, the routes issue?
Can I respond to that? I don't know if it
Yes,
was.
please.
I'm sorry. I don't know if that was a Mr. Messer thing. I believe that the decision of the board at that time, because if you recall, when this emergency sort of hit us, there was a great deal of concern expressed about the safety of 7th and 8th graders because they are still kids.
Little.
And so we made that decision to do that, but I think it's appropriate. I think that's a good recommendation. It's something for us to consider because there are many 7th and 8th graders that could write Metro and will write Metro, and that might free up. I don't know if it would.
I appreciate the comment, and I didn't mean to foist it onto him, but he was passionate about it as we were, and indeed that's one of the things we changed in policy.
Changed it, right.
But from a choice, if that could impact the start times for high schools or impact something like that, I think that would be worth it. I think too that B makes the most sense because it's the least disruption, as long as we have the assurance that it is also the bigger guarantee of getting kids to and from school on time. And hopefully that is the case because of the routes and being able to match. So that's number one, because obviously this can't fail. I know there's a couple of other things I want to say about the yellow bus piece, but I do think we do have to have a separate dedicated 10 bus for yellow bus for athletics specifically, and that we used to rent or have a guarantee, and our athletics department and our schools have not had that guarantee. It used to be a guarantee, and if that can become a guarantee without impacting the to and from, I think that would be important. Sounds like I'm in the minority on the 1 mile thing. I'll just say 3 things. First of all, the number one priority in all of our policies is safety. I have no interest in putting another 1,000 kids walking a little bit distance, even though we're fabulous and we do much more than the state requires. I think it's a better message. We moved it to 1 and we moved the high school situation to 1. We wanted a consistent message. You also are able to make it clearer to the city and to everybody that we need that radius of 1 mile around our schools, and this school year has proven it. And I think it's a messaging issue, it's a safety issue, and if we can find other ways to make up that difference of 8 routes or whatever, I would prefer to do that, because I know what it's like to sit here and have a kid be hurt walking to school. So I'm with everybody on B if that's the best that we can do and that makes the least disruption. But I do want to have that discussion that the superintendent has asked for regarding the changing of the 1 mile to 1.25 miles. But in lieu of has to be an option. Maybe general counsel can even find out if that's even an option, especially for charter families, since we use it for our own families too. But that might be too discriminatory or something. But in lieu of for our non-CPS families, that would seem to be a nice option.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bolton. I apologize for my alarm. That was a reminder for me to call my sister after the meeting is over.
Actually, it's
Not,
for me to take my medicine,
not
so I
that
appreciate it.
Eve needs to wrap up her comments. We are a little beyond 6, but this is really important, and I'm grateful for everybody's time. Mr. Craig.
So trying an effort to acknowledge that we're a little bit beyond the 6 o'clock to be short, but I had 3 thoughts really on this, and again, one of them is just kind of to share with what everyone else is saying with regard to schedule or to scenario B. I think part of that also goes into the conversation that we should be having and need to be having with regards to the opportunities to do more with those resources once we free them up. And so to Board Member Bolton's point about during the day times, it may also provide some incentive for folks to be more likely to be a driver if they would have a consistent full day worth of work, as opposed to working, in the beginning of the day and the end of the day, right? So if we're able to utilize those type of resources more, if they're able to get some folks to be more encouraged to spend an entire day driving as opposed to these small dedicated times. I think the other thing that at least came to my mind as well with our start times and with working with some of the folks in the community, the least disruption to our non-public and charter schools as possible is likely to get us the best chance of getting them to agree to it. And so I think that's one of the other things that's a big factor for me. With regard to the walking distance, I think one of the things that I thought in my head also is that maybe this is something that needs to be a more phased in approach to it. And so I know you had talked about with regard to grade levels, but I think we also would have to look at things like where the school is located. Some schools have a very treacherous path for students to get when you get to that 1 mile or 1.2 mile. And some places have like no sidewalks or things like that may be a factor. That's something we can do as we look more into that detail as we do the conversation point, right? So not every school may be the perfect fit for that 1.25 model, but that there may be some that are. The other thing that I really think is helpful with all of the information that we have here is that recognizing that some of these schools picked times for a reason, right? And I know of some conversations with some of the folks who work at some schools where some schools wanted an earlier time because, quite honestly, their kids were going to the businesses and not coming to school. And it's a hard thing to be able to go around and try and find all these kids at the local businesses, right? And that's something that I think we have to be thinking about in our conversations with our community partners and our neighborhood folks and the different organizations we're working with, at least with regard to our high schools, because our high schools are in an urban setting. That means they have access to things that otherwise folks in suburban communities would not see near their high schools. Same deal for release from school, though. And that's the one that I worry a little bit about with our start time and our end times, is just that you end school at 4 o'clock. It's a really hard getting kids on the bus with crowded buses and all these other things. And so I think that is, again, something I recognize the need for it, but I also think we have to have that conversation with Metro, with our yellow bus services, to just make sure that we're doing it in a way where our students are getting home safe after school. Getting them to school is one thing, because we can kind of do some little phase in, kids coming in, but leaving school where everybody leaves at the same time, essentially, it can cause a lot more of the chaos and disorder than coming to school.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. I think everybody's had a chance to go at least once except for me, and I'll go really briefly. So I share the perspective of my colleagues on liking scenario B. I do just want to compliment, I think, the overall presentation to Ms. Jones's point. It's extremely well laid out, extremely clear, very clear trade-offs. I think scenario B, the argument for it makes a lot of sense. I think on the walk distance, I feel very neutral on this. I can see arguments on both sides. I think colleagues tonight have raised some good points. I had 3 questions. I don't need an answer to them this evening, but I'll just leave them with you, Superintendent. You can share tonight or in the future. One was on start times. As I understand the recommendation from the medical community, the ideal is 8:30 or later for older kids. It might be that we can't do that. I just want to make sure we can say why, or it may be that we can. Are there things that would prevent us from having 8:30 across the board for high school kids? That was one question. Second, when it comes to the walk distance piece, I'd be interested in what other peer districts do across the country. It's tricky within Ohio because there's so many rural districts and suburban districts. But if we were to look at mid-sized urban districts, are we the outlier with the 1 mile distance? I think it would certainly make me feel more comfortable going to 1.25 if we could show that we're actually bringing us more in line with what is standard across the country. And then last was on the non-publics. I know enough to know that there are rules about this, but not enough to know what the rules are in terms of who has what decision-making rights in terms of start times. And so what I'm worried about is a world where we actually can't, where there is a significant opportunity for this to fall apart, not because of what we do, but because of decisions that other schools make. And if that is the world we're in, where some of this is just not within our control, I would love to know, and you may have already done this already, that we've just thought through the worst case scenario. To what extent does this not work if there's like a veto gate problem from totally outside CPS? And so those were the 3 questions I wanted to share. We can hear them tonight or some other time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. So we can, to the first question in terms of the 8:30 start, we went back to the policy. And so the policy, our policy actually supported the 8:30 healthy start, but also gave opportunity where if it was not feasible, and one of the things that it referenced, I believe, was because of transportation, if it wasn't feasible, then 8 o'clock would be supported. And so as we went back through and looked at the scenarios, the principals, even when we went as a district to the 8:30 start, or back to the 8:30 start, or not starting before 8, there were many principals that were concerned about that. We have at least one of our schools, two of our schools, that their athletic associations, a lot of their programs are not a part of our district, so they are bound by the requirements of those other organizations that they are with as well. So starting them later than 8 o'clock causes them challenges with the associations that they actually work with for athletics. And so that's it's really one of the biggest areas for high schools is the concern around athletics. So that's why the majority of them started, they requested 7:45. So that's why we tried to make sure that in the proposal, we were honoring the policy around Healthy Start, and also trying to recognize that there were schools that wanted to start at 7:45 that we were able to push to 8 o'clock. In terms of the walk zones, we can do some research around that. I think the Council of Great City Schools has actually done some research on that. So we can ask if they will just share that with us. We do know that in Ohio, because of the shortage, because it's not just us, it's a national shortage, and in many of our school districts, we've had the shortage as well. In many of our school districts, and I will double check with our Ohio 8, but in many of our school districts, they have moved closer to the 2.0 because of the challenge of getting students, of having drivers and being able to utilize those drivers. But I can get the specific information for the Ohio 8 and make the request for through the council to they just give us some information on that as well. The last, in terms of the walk, I think those were the 3. Board President, which one did I miss one?
No, just the last one was, to what extent could the non-publics throw a wrench in this?
Yeah.
And have we thought through that?
Yes, we have. And so we're starting with the overall engagement with them. There are some options for us because while we really want to work with them in terms of being partners, because many of them have had the same challenges that we've had. They've had to, because we've not been able to get students in school on time. There is the pay in lieu of option that's really only for charters, so we can't use that terminology as we think about our own students. But if we cannot transport them and we have support for why we can't transport them, then that does become an option for us. It's just something that we would have to communicate as quickly as possible. So that's another reason that this conversation is important at this point. So we're still thinking through, now that we're at this phase, like I shared, the ones that we really reached out to first were the ones that were greater than 30 minutes, because we knew that that may be where some of the greater challenge would be. We've gotten support from some of them. For at least one of them, if their start would have to be changed in their quote unquote board policy. And so we'd have to, kind of go back to them to see if that's something that they would have conversation with their board about, because all of us, want the students to get to school on time. There are also some things happening at the state level right now around this as well, where we've had some conversation with state representatives. We saw some of the information that was put out at the end of the week as well. And I think I shared it. I know that you all received that as well. So we're hoping that we get some relief in that space also. But now this is the time for us to really double down. So I think in about 2 weeks, we'll be able to give more feedback around that with the specificity around what we've gotten from those schools.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I think I want to give a last call for any board members who have anything to share, and then we will adjourn for the evening. Are there any board members who have a last comment? Ms. Bolden?
Question. Do we transport Cincinnati public school kids on the same buses that we transport our non-CPS students?
We asked that question before.
We don't.
So they actually have a separate system than ours.
Right. So they are a part of the pairings that we have to do in order to get them transportation. Because things were so challenging this year with our own start times kind of being all over the place, with their start times being all over the place, there were some where we were really only able to use a cadre of buses for just those schools, which took away from the fleet that we have to transport our students that are CPS students. So at least with the scenarios that we have moving into this year, we've actually paired all of them in terms of those starts. So that's what we're really looking to work with them on. And also one other question, board member Bolton, that you asked, for us, and if I didn't clarify this, I apologize. For us, we are really thinking about all of those additional things as options. So to start with, this is all K-8 students. Right now, we have about 1,000 7th and 8th graders that ride Metro that we still would like to give them the option to do that. And then we have a certain population that we couldn't call it pay in lieu of, but they did take payment to not be on the school buses. And so we really want to continue with all of those options, because the more we do that, the more opportunity it opens up for us to make sure that we have more than enough buses and drivers to do some of the other things that we know are really important.
Great, thank you. And that was my issue about the separate system, so to speak. And then also the issue is not now vehicles necessarily as it once was on the yellow buses. It's employment and drivers.
Thank you very much. Are there any last comments from board members? Was that Dr. Moffett?
So I want to be clear, because I'm getting a little confused. So we asked a question of administration and to our council months ago around any restrictions for transporting pubs and non-pubs on the same routes. And there was no revised code that said that they couldn't be. So can we get a scenario where we're looking at transportation rather than having separate routes, having them all on the same buses to go? Because we looked at that. We made that request months ago. What's the savings for that? What is the what is the time look like? Have we explored that option? And then my other question was regarding corridors. Can we at least get the data too? Because we did talk about that months ago. And there was no restriction. I don't think there was any further exploration, but there was no revised code limiting us from doing that. And we just never talked about it. So I would love to see the data on that if possible.
The one restriction is that
Ms.
7th
Bolden,
and 8th graders
is there a-
can't do Metro.
Right. And I think for us to respond, there are two things. There is not a restriction to doing that. However, as we spoke with our partner that we work with to provide the information for us, collectively, we did not necessarily find that it was the most efficient because we still have the issue of start time. So even if the students are riding the same bus, they still have to go to two different places in order for them to then be able to start school. So the most important and the most efficient is for us to have either a level of pairing, like the recommendations that we've given, or one set of pairing with a singleton across the middle in terms of that means that those buses would then be individually utilized to run just those routes. So that's why we really have not continue to, in terms of the initial conversations, those were questions that were asked. And then when we got involved in really what would make it the most efficient, we did not find that would be the most efficient because of the need to take a group of students to school and then move from that location to another group, when really what we need is to be able to get them to get back, run a route, and get the other students to school. In terms of the corridors, I want to be certain that I am clear on the ask, because that is something that would really take us a lot more time to do in the middle of trying to get all the students routed. So what is the specific ask around the corridor piece? And we really would need to work with the team to determine, how far out we'd be able to provide that information, because any time that we take focused on that at this point is keeping us from being able to get our students prepared and routed for this year.
Well, I sent that in an email, so you've already got the request in an email from earlier this week. So, I mean, I'm happy to resend it, but I had already sent that request a couple of days ago.
Right, and I was able to respond to it. I guess we can talk about it at some other point. I just want to be clear on what we're looking to get in that space because of the overall amount of time that it would take to do that and not really knowing if that's the direction that we're going to go. So I'll go back to the email. I responded to that email, but we can have dialogue about it so that me and the team are clear on what we're looking for in that space.
I think there may come a time too, right, where there might be some recommendations that come out of the ad hoc committee that would then come to the board. And then depending on where those go, there could be then some follow-up that happens. But it seems like it would, I'm glad we have a process and a timeline and a work plan for the ad hoc committee. I think we play that through, we see what those recommendations are, and then move forward. Are there any other comments or questions before we adjourn for the evening? Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.